Welcome to Starbound's second channel. My name is Jack. I'll be your narrator today. Before we start the video, please just go below and check to see if you're subscribed. It's 100% free, and it just allows our videos to pop up on your feed more often. Thanks for watching. Stay away from Earth. The message was brief, transmitted in perfect Idorian across all known frequencies. What unsettled the Empire's intelligence analysts wasn't the content. They'd received plenty of warnings before. It was the source. A primitive planet that shouldn't have been capable of detecting their cloaked surveillance vessels, let alone communicate across light years in their language. Prince Egit's claws clicked against the ancient stone floor of the war room, each step echoing through chambers that had witnessed the planning of 1,000 conquests. The royal palace of Gathan had been carved from a single mountain of black granite in the time of his great-grandfather, its walls adorned not with the gaudy crystals favored by lesser species, but with the bones of those who had dared to resist the Empire's inevitable expansion. He paused before a particularly eye-catching display, the complete skeleton of a Centaurian warchief. Their species had also sent warnings, made threats. Now they existed only as artifacts and cautionary tales. The thought should have comforted him, but something about this situation with Earth felt different. "You seem troubled, my son." Emperor Akan's voice filled the chamber like rolling thunder. The Emperor's massive form emerged from the shadows, his obsidian scales almost blending with the dim light. Weak bioluminescent light emerged from beneath those scales in a display of barely contained power. His father's curved horns, each as long as Egit's arms, bore the ceremonial etchings of 100 successful campaigns. Egit straightened to his full height, still 2 feet shorter than his father. The humans knew we were watching. They shouldn't have known. "And that is precisely why they must be dealt with now." The Emperor's sulphurous breath carried across the chamber. "Their rate of technological advancement is unprecedented. Our projections show them achieving interstellar travel within decades, not centuries." "Then why not wait until they reach space? Destroy them in open combat as tradition demands." The Emperor's claws scraped against the stone as he moved to activate the war room's primary display. A holographic Earth appeared between them, surrounded by data streams that made Egit's heart race. The humans' progression from primitive combustion engines to crude atomic weapons had taken less than a century. Their information technology doubled in power every few rotations of their world. "Because, my son, they are dangerous, in ways that numbers cannot fully capture." The Emperor's tail lashed against the floor. "They learn fast. Every challenge makes them stronger. Consider their response to capturing our scout ships. Instead of accepting their fate or trying to flee like any sensible species, they unite and prepare for either friendship or war." Egit studied the projection, noting the humans' bizarre habit of deliberately exposing themselves to danger for what their data suggested was simple curiosity. The message had nothing about friendship. "Perhaps, but their diplomatic channels remain open." The Emperor activated another display, showing the message that had prompted this meeting. "They are clever enough to detect our presence despite our best stealth technology. Clever enough to learn our language from the limited data stored in a single captured scout vessel. These humans..." He let out a growl. "They must be eliminated before they can become a true threat." "And you wish me to lead this campaign?" Egit felt the weight of the moment pressing down on his armored shoulders. His first command would be a preemptive strike against a pre-FTL civilization. There was little glory in such an assignment. "I wish you to learn, my son." The Emperor's glowing red eyes fixed upon him. "The humans represent everything that makes a species dangerous to our dominion. They breed quickly. They learn faster than others. Their technologies advance in unexpected ways, but most concerning." He enlarged a section of the data stream. "They imagine." "Imagine, Father?" "Their information networks are filled with stories, tales of conflict with beings from beyond their world. In many of these stories, they win." The Emperor's voice carried a note of genuine concern. "They rehearse war,
with the unknown before ever encountering it. They prepare for threats they have never seen, and they do that for fun.
Egit examined the data more carefully now. The humans' entertainment indeed seemed fixated on scenarios of interstellar conflict. In some of their movies, their primitive civilization somehow prevailed against vastly superior forces. Such hubris would amuse him normally, but combined with their rapid advancement and their impossible detection of the Empire's scouts?
You understand now?
The Emperor placed a massive clawed hand on Egit's shoulder, his scales scraping against his son's ceremonial armor.
We must strike while we hold absolute advantage. Your task is not to wage a glorious war, but to prevent one. To eliminate a threat before it fully materializes.
Yes, Father. Egit straightened, his own scales tightening with pretend determination. How shall we proceed? The Emperor's mouth curved into what passed for a smile among their kind, his sulphurous breath washing over his son.
First, we shall offer them peace, as we always do. Then we attack when they expect a peaceful first contact.
The words settled like cold stone in Egit's gut. He had been raised on tales of honorable conquest, of mighty battles where superior force met superior force in open combat. This felt different, wrong, but centuries of imperial conditioning held his tongue, kept his posture rigid and accepting. Even thinking such thoughts felt like betrayal to his father, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that this preemptive peace was itself an admission of fear. If humans were truly inferior, why not wait and face them directly? Days of War Council deliberations passed in a blur of tactical projections and invasion scenarios. Egit sat through them all, offering the expected suggestions when prompted, nodding at the appropriate moments. But each time he watched the simulations of Earth's defenses being systematically dismantled, he found himself admiring the humans' desperate creativity, their ability to innovate and improvise even in the face of overwhelming odds. They reminded him in some strange way of the ancient stories of his own people, before they had become an empire of cold calculation and cruelty. Finally, as the day of the attack approached, Emperor Akan and Prince Egit watched from the depths of Gathon's royal palace as their fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. The war room's numerous displays cast an eerie glow across their obsidian scales, showing 12 massive vessels whose gleaming hulls concealed enough firepower to reduce a planet to ash. Despite being light years from the actual conflict, the Imperial Command Center's neural links made it feel as though they stood aboard each ship simultaneously.
Observe, my son.
Emperor Akan's voice carried that familiar tone of smug satisfaction as his claws pressed against his enormous legs.
Watch how easily they welcome their own doom. You'll have the glory of this victory without ever leaving the palace.
He gestured with one massive claw toward the main display, where recordings from previous conquests played in sequence. World after world, species after species, all following the same pattern. The war room screens showed the archives in perfect clarity, the Centurions opening their spaceports in celebration, the Stellari colonies preparing great feasts for their celestial visitors, the Ciarians exchanging cultural artifacts right up until the moment the plasma cannons melted their cities. The bones of their leaders now adorned the very walls from which their extinction had been orchestrated.
Our appearance alone usually terrifies them into compliance.
The Emperor continued, his scales tightening with amusement as he lounged in his command throne.
They try so hard to prove they aren't afraid that they ignore their own instincts. Their fear of angering a powerful but perhaps friendly species blinds them to obvious danger.
Egit monitored the incoming transmission through his neural interface, far more modest than his father's ancient throne. Earth's first response made his scales prickle. They're requesting that we maintain our current distance while they send an ambassador to greet us.
The Emperor's laugh echoed off the stone walls. As expected. They fear offending us more than they fear our capabilities.
He activated another display, showing the weapon systems hidden beneath the fleet's decorative outer plates.
The aesthetic modifications to our ships cost us some minimal combat efficiency, but the surprise advantage more than compensates, and you, my son, will be remembered as the architect of this conquest.
But Egit couldn't shake his unease as he paced the cold floor, his mind recoiling at the thought of being the architect of this conquest. The human's response had been too calculated, too precise. There was none of the panic or desperate enthusiasm he'd seen in the historical recordings. Father, their message pattern differs from our previous encounters.
All species have their quirks, my son.
The Emperor's claws scraped against his throne's ancient stone as he shifted position.
Some grovel, some bluster, some attempt to impress. In the end, they all fall the same way.
The tactical officer's hologram materialized in the center of the war room. My Emperor, the humans are requesting technical specifications for proper docking procedures. They wish to ensure their facilities can accommodate our vessel's mass.
Send them false numbers, the Emperor commanded, sulphurous breath curling around his words. Let them think us less substantial than we are. It will make their eventual realization of our true power all the sweeter.
Egit moved closer to the main tactical display, studying the blue-white planet that their fleet approached. The humans had arranged their orbital installations in what appeared to be a haphazard pattern, with satellites and stations scattered without obvious strategic purpose. Yet something about their placement nagged at his tactical training. Perhaps we should order a more cautious approach, he suggested, trying to keep the concern from his voice. We still don't know how they detected our scout ships. The Emperor's tail lashed against his throne.
You worry too much, Egit. This is how doubt begins to poison a commander's resolve.
He activated another historical display, showing the conquest of the Arcturus system.
Look here. They too had impressive technological capabilities in certain areas, but technology without the will to use it properly is meaningless. Your name will be carved into these very walls as the conqueror of Earth, whether you believe in yourself or not.
As Egit tried to ignore his father's unwelcome offer of glory, the humans expressed their intention to conduct the initial diplomatic exchange aboard one of their own orbital platforms, citing concerns about their atmosphere's incompatibility with their biology. The Emperor's scales pulsed with satisfaction at this perceived sign of submission.
They seek to accommodate us, to demonstrate their civilization's maturity, he rumbled, just as all the others did.
The Emperor's twisted horns caught the light as he transmitted orders to the fleet commanders.
Begin the approach sequence. Accept their invitation, but prepare the secondary strike force to emerge from hyperspace on my signal.
Egit studied the tactical displays with growing discomfort. The scattered human installations were beginning to look less random with each passing moment. If he traced lines between them, they formed interlocking fields of fire that could... He shook his head, dismissing the thought. Surely he was overthinking this. Father, he tried one last time. Should we not at least order the bulk of our fleet to maintain a safer distance? Basic tactical doctrine suggests...
Tactical doctrine is for wars against equals.
The Emperor cut him off, rising from his throne to tower over his son.
This is not war, my son. This is pest control. These humans, for all their rapid advancement, are children playing at civilization. They don't even have proper energy shielding. Our victory is assured.
From their command center deep within the mountain, they watched as the fleet continued its approach, weapons hidden but ready, while the humans transmitted docking protocols and welcome messages. Everything was proceeding according to the pattern that had worked countless times before. Yet Egit couldn't help but noticing that each human transmission seemed to take exactly the same amount of time to reach them, regardless of its complexity, as if they were following a script, not replying naturally.
Time to enlighten another species about their true place in the galaxy,
the Emperor declared, his massive form casting shadows across the tactical displays.
Watch closely, my son. This is how we ensure the Empire's dominance. not through brute force alone, but through the artful manipulation of lesser beings' desires to prove themselves worthy of the stars.
The fleet passed the orbit of the human's moon, formation perfect, weapons primed beneath their decorative plates. Egot's claws dug into his palms as he watched the distance decrease. The scattered human installations now seemed to be adjusting their positions slightly, movements so subtle they barely registered on the tactical displays. Everything was going according to plan. Everything was proceeding exactly as it had dozens of times before. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. And before Egot could express his worry, the first explosion caught everyone in the war room by surprise as one of their ships exploded before even firing its weapons. One moment, the tactical display showed their lead ship approaching the human's orbital platform. The next, a shining light consumed the ship, reducing it to nothing.
Impossible!
The Emperor breathed, sulphurous breath hanging heavy in the air as he leaned forward on his throne. The supposedly random pattern of human installations suddenly revealed their true purpose, each position marking a node in an interlocking web of defensive fire. Egot watched in horror as primitive but devastatingly effective kinetic weapons, simple metal projectiles accelerated to relativistic speeds, tore through their fleet's supposedly superior shields. The humans hadn't waited for the Idorian ships to reveal their hostile intentions. They had known. They had prepared.
Evasive action!
The Emperor's roar shook dust from the ancient ceiling.
Deploy combat screens! Return fire!
But even as he gave orders, more human weapons revealed themselves. What they had witnessed as debris turned out to be carefully positioned missile platforms, each launching swarms of nuclear-tipped projectiles. The neural link fed tactical data directly into their brains, forcing them to experience every moment of the slaughter. Egot felt phantom pain as the first ship's crew died, their final moments broadcast through the command network. The vessel's death throes played out across multiple displays, its hull peeling apart under the relentless barrage. They knew it! Egot realized, watching as the humans executed perfect overlapping fields of fire. That's the only explanation.
Silence!
The Emperor's tail lashed violently enough to crack the stone floor.
They are primitives. They cannot possibly...
His words cut off as another ship disappeared from the tactical display, its death marked by a spectacular explosion that scattered debris across the carefully planned formation. More ships fell as the humans revealed layer after layer of prepared defenses. Laser arrays, hidden in what they had assumed were civilian satellites, burned through armor that had withstood the weapons of far more advanced civilizations. But it wasn't the technology that made their assault so devastating. It was the timing. The coordination, the evidence of extensive preparation. The warning message, Egot said softly, his scales tight with realization. They weren't trying to deter us. They were luring us into a trap. The Emperor's massive form rose to its full height, his horns scraping against the chamber's ceiling as he bellowed orders for the reserve fleet to jump in.
We will not be humiliated by primitives.
We will not. My Emperor! The tactical officer's hologram flickered with urgency. They're targeting our command and control frequencies. Somehow they used the data from the captured scout ship to... The transmission dissolved into static as human electronic warfare systems began systematically dismantling their combat networks. Egot watched as the humans demonstrated just how much they had learned from that single captured vessel. Their electronic attacks displayed an intimate knowledge of Idorian communication protocols, targeting critical systems the moment they were needed the most. Each strike revealed years of preparation. All ships, withdraw immediately, Egret tried to order, but his father's massive clawed hand clamped down on his shoulder.
You forget yourself, my son,
the Emperor growled.
I command here. This changes nothing. They simply struck first, but we have other fleets.
A new message cut across all their frequencies, broadcasting again in perfect Idorian. This was your only warning. We have demonstrated a fraction of our defensive capabilities. Return to Earth, and we will demonstrate our offensive ones. The Emperor's laugh held a note of hysteria.
More bluffs. from desperate primitives. They dare to threaten—"
"Father," Egid interrupted, his voice steady despite his racing heart.
"This was all planned. We lost the battle the moment they captured our probe ship. We should stop this and rethink our strategy."
The war room's displays told the story in brutal clarity. Of their initial 12 ships, 7 were complete losses, 3 were crippled, and 2 were combat ineffective. The reserve fleet hung at the edge of the system waiting for orders, but the humans had already demonstrated their ability to engage targets at that range.
Impossible,"
the Emperor repeated, but softer now.
"They're primitives. They don't even have proper energy shielding. They—"
"No," Egid said, straightening to his full height. "They have exactly what they need. They knew we were coming. They prepared and won. We should accept the loss and retreat with honor." The Emperor's claws dug furrows in his ancient throne.
"You suggest we flee? Like cowards?"
"I suggest we learn, Father." Egid gestured to the tactical displays. "They didn't just defeat our ships, they proved they understood us, studied us, prepared for us, and then gave us a chance to withdraw." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "Just like our ancestors would have done in their position." As if to emphasize his point, another message arrived. "Your remaining vessels have 16 minutes to begin withdrawal before we initiate our next phase of defensive operations. We will transmit safe departure vectors. Use them or die." The Emperor's scales rippled with rage, but Egid could see the calculation behind his father's glowing red eyes. Their fleet was in ruins, their tactical surprise was lost, and somewhere out there a species they had dismissed as primitive had not only anticipated their every move, but had chosen to let them retreat rather than press their advantage.
"Signal the withdrawal,"
the Emperor finally growled, his massive form seeming to shrink as he sank back into his throne.
"But this is not over. We will return with—"
"No, Father," Egid said in shock as he stared at a glowing display. "I don't think we will." His claws trembled as he processed the new data streaming across the tactical screens. "They're not letting us retreat. They never intended to." The Emperor rose from his throne, moving to see what had caused his son's scales to pale. The displays showed human warships emerging from hyperspace throughout Idorian territory. Not dozens, but hundreds. They had somehow mapped the Empire's defense grid, its shipyards, its primary military installations. The safe departure vectors they'd transmitted were leading the surviving ships directly into prepared kill zones.
"Impossible,"
the Emperor breathed, but the word had lost its force.
"They don't have faster-than-light capability. They can't."
"They might have reverse engineered it," Egid interrupted. "From the scout ship. They didn't just study our weapons and communications. They took everything." New alerts flashed across the screens as human vessels appeared in orbit around their primary shipyard worlds. "And they built their warfleet in secret in the years we spent deciding the fate of their planet, thinking ourselves so clever, so superior." The war room erupted in chaos as reports flooded in from across Idorian space. The humans weren't just attacking military targets. They were systematically destroying every facility capable of producing warships, every stockpile of strategic materials, every defense platform. It was a precisely calculated campaign of industrial annihilation.
"Order all reserves to protect the shipyards,"
the Emperor commanded, his sulphurous breath coming in sharp bursts.
"Activate the home defense fleet. We cannot allow—"
A blinding flash filled their primary display as the largest shipyard in the Gathan system disappeared in a nuclear firestorm. The humans weren't even bothering to engage in ship-to-ship combat. They were using overwhelming force against strategic targets, accepting no risks, and performing attacks that would leave them without a safe return vector. "Father," Egid's voice cracked as he watched another installation vanish from their tactical grid. "We need to evacuate. Not just the military, everyone. They're not going to stop until we can never threaten them again." The Emperor's tail lashed violently.
We do not flee. We are the Eidorian Empire. We have ruled the stars for 1,000 generations. We might be extinct if we don't act now, Egit roared, surprising himself with his defiance. We could gather the civilians and flee to the colonies. The tactical displays painted a brutal picture. In less than an hour, the humans had destroyed more military infrastructure than the Empire had lost in its last 10 wars combined. Their methodology was ruthless. No warnings, no demands, just the simultaneous execution of what had clearly been years of planning. I beg you, Father, Egit continued, his horns lowered in submission even as his words challenged everything they had believed. We already lost. A new alert drew their attention. The humans had begun targeting the Empire's long-range communication arrays, an attempt to isolate military commands from their units. Father, please, Egit tried again, watching as another defense platform vanished from their screens. Order the evacuation. We can save our people, if not our empire. We have enough cargo ships to move everyone. Perhaps they will show us mercy if we scatter across the galaxy. The Emperor stood motionless, his massive form silhouetted against displays showing the systematic dismantling of everything he had ruled. His curved horns, etched with the records of 100 victories, seemed to weigh heavy on his head. Mercy, he finally spoke, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. You think there is such a thing as mercy? They are not being merciful. They are being thorough. He gestured to a tactical overlay, showing the precise positioning of human forces. They will do to us what we would do to them. Fresh alerts drew their attention to a new development. The humans had begun targeting their fuel refineries and antimatter production facilities, but with conventional weapons rather than nuclear devices. They were deliberately avoiding any damage to habitable worlds or civilian populations. They're going to pen us in, the Emperor continued, failing to see any silver lining. Destroy our ability to build ships, to fuel them, to arm them. They'll reduce us to a pre-industrial species if we force their hand. His tail dragged against the floor, all its usual aggressive energy gone. Egit watched as another shipyard died, its destruction precisely calculated to avoid damage to nearby civilian habitats. What are your orders, Father? The Emperor's bioluminescent patterns suddenly flared bright enough to illuminate the entire chamber, his massive form rising from the throne with renewed fury. Order all surviving ships to converge on Earth. Every vessel, every weapon we have left, launch everything at once. If we die fighting. Father, no! Egit's heart raced as he watched madness overcome reason. They've demonstrated it, they can— I am Emperor. The roar shook dust from the ancient ceiling. I will not be humbled by primitives. Better extinction than submission. Now send the order. Egit looked at his father, really looked at him, and saw not the legendary conqueror of his childhood, but a proud creature choosing death over adaptation. In that moment, everything changed. No, Egit said quietly, backing away from the command throne. Then louder. No! He turned and ran from the war room, his father's enraged roars echoing behind him. His claws clicked against stone as he raced through corridors lined with bones of extinct species, monuments to pride that now seemed like warnings. Reaching the palace's communication hub, he shoved aside the startled technicians and accessed the civilian emergency broadcast network. His voice would reach every Eidorian colony, every settlement, every ship still capable of receiving transmissions. This is Prince Egit, he announced, his voice steady despite his racing hearts. Our empire has fallen. The humans have destroyed our capacity for war, but perhaps we have a chance to survive if we abandon our dreams of conquest. My father chooses extinction. I choose survival. Any who wish to live, flee to the outer colonies, abandon military service, Save yourselves and your children. The age of the Idorian Empire is over. The age of survival begins. Behind him, he could hear the sound of guards approaching. His father's final orders would already be transmitting through military channels, sending what remained of their fleet to its death. But perhaps enough would hear his message. Perhaps enough would choose life over pride. Egit straightened his spine, ready to face the consequences of his choice. He had chosen an uncertain future over certain death. The palace guards found him in the communication hub, but their hesitation was all he needed. Egit pushed past them, using his lifetime's knowledge of the palace's corridors to reach the nearest landing bay. His father's furious orders echoed through the neural network, but they were already being drowned out by the chaos of evacuation. It took a while for a colonial ship to rescue him, commanded by a captain who had chosen survival over loyalty. Egit made the leap just as the ramp began to close, leaving behind everything he had ever known. As the ship burst through Gathan's atmosphere, he felt the weight of Imperial destiny fall away, replaced by the burden of ensuring his people's survival. From the viewport of the colonial transport ship, Egit watched his homeworld grow smaller. His father's roars still echoed in his memory, but they were drowned out by the sound of thousands of Idorians crowded into the vessel's holds, families who had heeded his warning, soldiers who had chosen survival over pride, civilians who had understood that their entire way of life was ending. The tactical feeds were still active on his neural interface, showing him everything. He couldn't look away as his father gathered the remaining loyal ships for one final, futile assault on Earth. The Emperor's last transmission blazed across all frequencies.
We are the Idorian Empire. We do not submit. We do not...
The transmission cut off as human weapons tore through the attacking fleet. There was no glory in it. No epic final battle. Just the cold mathematics of a lot of energy being released in a very short time. The humans didn't even bother with demands for surrender. They simply eliminated each other as it appeared, their actions speaking clearly enough. Stay away from Earth, or die. My Emperor, one of his father's former advisors approached, horns lowered in submission. The title felt wrong to Egit. He had never wanted to gain the crown this way. The humans are approaching Gathan. It seems they're targeting the palace specifically. Through the viewport, Egit watched lances of light descend from orbit. The royal palace carved from a mountain and stood for thousands of years, decorated with the bones of conquered species, housing the collected knowledge of their empire, disappeared in a flash that lit up half the continent. Are the humans still sending us messages? Egit asked, his claws pressed against the transparent barrier between him and the vacuum of space. The advisor's scales rippled with distress. Nothing. Egit turned from the viewport, forcing himself to focus on the living rather than the ruins of the past. How many heeded the warning? How many ships got away? Early reports suggest 30% of our population managed to evacuate. The fate of the civilians who failed to flee will likely be decided by the humans. Most of those who fled headed for outer colonies, as you suggested. The advisor's tail twitched. But those colonies were built to support an empire, not sustain our species. They lack the infrastructure for long-term survival. Then we build it. Egit moved through the crowded ship, his massive form somehow less imposing than it had been days ago. We were warriors because we chose to be, not because we had to be. We can choose to be something else. The ship's command center was barely larger than his old personal quarters, filled with refugees of high rank trying to coordinate the exodus. Their scales rippled in submission as he entered, not out of fear or tradition now, but something closer to desperate hope. Plot courses for the systems beyond the galactic rim, he ordered. We find worlds too far and too poor for anyone else to want. We learn to live simply, to build rather than take. His claws danced across the tactical displays, marking potential routes. We learn to be small before we can grow again. Small? One of the military commanders spat the word like a curse. We were the greatest empire the galaxy had ever... and now we are refugees." Egit cut him off. "The humans didn't just defeat us. They showed us what a truly great power looks like. One that prepares for years, that builds in secret, that strikes once, and completely." His tail lashed with remembered humiliation. "We will rebuild, and we can do the same one day. But perhaps no conqueror species will force our hand like we did to humanity." Through his neural interface, he watched the systematic dismantling of everything his ancestors had built. The humans wasted no shots, no unnecessary destruction. Every target served the single purpose of ensuring the Idorian Empire could never rise again. "Send word to all surviving ships," he commanded. "Any who wish to follow my father's path of prideful extinction may do so. I will lead those who wish to live to the far reaches of space. We will build new homes, learn new ways." His scales tightened with determination. "We will remember this lesson, teach it to our children, write it in our books. The most dangerous species in the galaxy are not those who display their power, but those who hide it until they must use it." Hours passed as reports trickled in. Most of the surviving ships chose to follow him. A few, commanded by older warriors who couldn't abandon their pride, turned back to die in glorious but futile attacks. The humans dealt with them quickly, giving them the warriors' death they sought. A final transmission reached them as they prepared for the long journey into exile. The humans had finished their work. The Idorian Empire's military capability had been reduced to pre-industrial levels. Their shipyards were gone. Their fuel refineries were slag. Their weapon platforms were debris. But their civilian infrastructure surprisingly remained largely intact. "Your species has been contained," the message stated in their own language. "Remain within your designated zones and you will be left in peace. Attempt to rebuild your military capability and you will be reduced further. We are still deciding whether we will protect you and the species you conquered learn of your downfall." Egit looked out at the stars, seeing them differently now. Not as territory to be conquered and contained, but as refuge to be sought. His father had named their campaign the Emperor's Last Conquest. He had been right, in a way. It was the last conquest, but not as the retirement he had intended. "Set course for the void between spiral arms," he ordered. "We find empty stars, dead worlds, places no one else would want." His claws traced the star maps, plotting their journey into voluntary exile. "And if we ever encounter the humans again?" one of the children asked, looking up at him with innocent curiosity. Egit lowered his horns to meet the child's gaze. "Then we hope enough time has passed for them to forget us, or at least forgive us." He straightened, looking out at the endless stars that awaited them. "And if they have, we vow never to repeat the mistake of attacking them again." The ship of the Exodus disappeared into hyperspace, carrying with them not the pride of the Empire, but the humility of a species that had glimpsed its own extinction and chosen a different path. Behind them, the bones of their conquests turned to dust in empty halls. Monuments to a kind of greatness Egit would teach them to never seek again.